My dear brother and sister, every heart carries a hidden weight. Some carry fear of the future, some regret of the past, and some anxiety about things completely beyond their control. We plan, we worry, we overthink, yet the heart remains restless. But there is a moment, subtle yet powerful, when a believer truly places trust in Allah. In that moment, something extraordinary happens. The noise inside the heart quiets down. The fear begins to loosen its grip. A calm descends that cannot be explained by logic, money, people, or circumstances. This peace does not come because problems disappear. It comes because the heart knows who is in control. Trust in Allah does not mean life will always go according to our plans. It means accepting that Allah's plan is greater than ours. Many people say they trust Allah, but their hearts panic the moment something unexpected happens. Real trust begins when doors close, when answers are delayed, and when outcomes feel uncertain. At that point, the believer says, Allah knows what I do not. This surrender is not weakness, it is spiritual strength. When the heart stops fighting destiny, peace naturally enters. Trust in Allah truly begins at the point where human control ends. As long as a person feels fully in charge, confident that their planning, intelligence, money or connections can handle everything, the heart remains attached to its own strength. This attachment creates anxiety, because deep down, the soul knows that human control is fragile. Plans fail, people change, and circumstances shift without warning. When something unexpected happens, the heart shakes. Not because the situation is unbearable, but because the illusion of control has been broken. This is where true trust is tested, and where it actually starts. Many people say they trust Allah, yet their hearts are restless when outcomes are delayed or when things do not go as planned. They pray, but they also panic. They make dua, but they also obsess over every possible result. This inner conflict drains peace. Real trust is not proven when life is smooth. It is proven when the road becomes unclear. When doors close that you desperately wanted open, when effort does not bring immediate reward, when answers remain hidden despite sincere prayers. This is the moment when trust either collapses or deepens. The believer who truly trusts Allah does not deny the pain of disappointment, but they refuse to let that pain turn into despair. Control is something the human ego clings to. We like to feel certain, secure, and prepared. Yet Allah reminds us again and again that certainty belongs only to Him. You may plan for years, but one moment can change everything. You may try to manage every detail, yet a single decree can rearrange your entire life. When a believer understands this reality, they stop fighting destiny. Instead of exhausting the heart by trying to control what cannot be controlled, they surrender their affairs to Allah with humility. This surrender is not passive, it is deeply active faith. You still strive, you still work hard, but your heart no longer carries the weight of the outcome. When control ends, the believer learns to say, Allah knows best, even if I do not understand right now. Statement is not a cliché, it is a declaration of trust. It means accepting that Allah sees the full picture while we see only a fragment. What feels like a loss today may be protection. What feels like a delay may be preparation. What feels like a closed door may be Allah saving you from something you cannot see. Once the heart accepts this truth, resistance fades and peace begins to settle. Trust also reshapes how a believer responds to fear. Fear often comes from imagining worst-case scenarios and feeling powerless before them. But when control ends and trust begins, fear loses its grip. The heart realizes that no situation unfolds outside Allah's permission. Nothing reaches you unless Allah allows it, and nothing misses you unless Allah wills it so. This realization does not make a person careless. It makes them calm. The believer understands that their responsibility is effort and sincerity, not control over results. There is also freedom in this trust. A heart that tries to control everything becomes exhausted, constantly tense, and emotionally overwhelmed. A heart that trusts Allah breathes easier. It learns to let go of what it cannot change and to focus on what it can: faith, patience, and good action. This is why trust brings peace even in hardship. The storm may still rage, but the heart is anchored. The believer is no longer drowning in what ifs because they have placed their trust in the one who controls all outcomes. When control ends, the believer also stops measuring success solely by worldly standards. They stop asking, "Did I get exactly what I wanted?" and start asking, "Did I rely on Allah and remain sincere?" This shift is powerful. It protects the heart from arrogance when things go well and from bitterness when things go wrong. Everything becomes an opportunity for closeness to Allah rather than a test of personal worth. Ultimately, true trust is a quiet confidence that Allah will take care of you even if the path looks unfamiliar. It is choosing faith over panic, surrender over resistance, and hope over despair. When you stop gripping tightly to control and place your affairs in Allah's hands, you realize that you were never meant to carry that burden alone. And in that moment, when control ends and trust begins, the heart finally experiences the peace it has been searching for all along. The world teaches us that peace comes from success, stability, or control. Islam teaches us that peace is a gift from Allah, given to hearts that rely on Him. You can have everything and still feel empty, or you can have very little and feel content. When trust in Allah is firm, the heart no longer depends on people's approval, material outcomes, or perfect situations. That inner calm becomes independent of the chaos around you. Peace is something every human being searches for, yet very few truly understand where it comes from. Many assume peace is the natural result of achieving goals, solving problems, or creating a perfectly stable life. People chase financial security, strong relationships, recognition, and control, believing that once these are in place, their hearts will finally rest. But experience proves otherwise. There are countless individuals who have wealth, comfort, and success, yet their minds are restless and their hearts unsettled. This is because real peace is not something the world can produce. It is not manufactured by circumstances. It is granted by Allah as a gift to hearts that rely on Him. When peace is treated as a result, it becomes conditional. I will be at peace when this problem is solved, or I will be happy when things go my way. This mindset traps the heart in constant waiting. As soon as one issue ends, another begins, and peace is postponed again and again. Trusting Allah breaks a cycle. It teaches the believer that peace is not at the end of struggle. It is present during the struggle for those who rely on their Lord. This peace is not loud or dramatic. It quietly settles in the heart, allowing a person to remain steady even when life is uncertain. This gift of peace comes from knowing that Allah is managing every detail. The believer understands that nothing is random and nothing is wasted. Every experience, whether pleasant or painful, is meaningful. When this belief becomes firm, the heart stops resisting reality. Instead of fighting what has already been decreed, the believer accepts it with humility. Acceptance does not mean enjoying hardship, but it means trusting that Allah's wisdom is greater than personal understanding. That trust is what invites peace into the heart. Of the most beautiful aspects of this peace is that it does not depend on having answers. Human beings often demand explanations before they feel calm. They want to know why something happened, how it will end, and when relief will come. But the peace Allah gives does not require full understanding. It requires faith. The believer may not see the solution yet, but their heart rests in the certainty that Allah sees it clearly. This certainty removes the urgency to control everything and allows the heart to remain calm while waiting. This peace also protects the believer from emotional extremes. When something good happens, the heart is grateful but not arrogant because it knows the blessing is from Allah. When something difficult happens, the heart is saddened but not shattered because it knows Allah is still in control. In this way, peace acts like a stabilizing force, keeping the believer balanced through life's highs and lows. It prevents success from turning into pride and hardship from turning into despair. Another powerful dimension of this gift is independent from people and outcomes. When peace comes from Allah, the heart no longer relies on validation, approval, or reassurance from others. It is no longer shaken by people's opinions or behavior. The believer understands that people can disappoint, misunderstand, or leave, but Allah never abandons His servants. This realization frees the heart from emotional dependence on creation and strengthens its connection with the Creator. This peace also teaches patience in a deeper sense. Instead of waiting anxiously for things to change, the believer waits with trust. Patience becomes active rather than passive. The heart remains hopeful, not because circumstances look promising, but because Allah's mercy is certain. This kind of patience is light on the soul. It does not feel like suffering, it feels like endurance supported by faith. When peace is recognized as a gift, gratitude naturally follows. The believer begins to thank Allah not only for ease but also for endurance, not only for solutions but also for strength during delay. This gratitude deepens trust and invites even more peace. It becomes a cycle of reliance, calm, and thankfulness that strengthens the heart over time. In the end, the peace that comes from trusting Allah cannot be produced by effort alone. It is not earned through control or achievement. It is gifted to hearts that surrender their worries, fears, and expectations to their Lord. When a believer understands this, they stop chasing peace through the world and start receiving it through faith. And once this peace settles in the heart, it becomes clear that it was never the result of circumstances. It was always a divine gift, placed exactly where it belongs. Believers still experience loss, hardship, and sadness. Trust in Allah does not eliminate pain, but it removes hopelessness. The heart understands that every test has wisdom, every delay has purpose, and every hardship carries hidden mercy. When you trust Allah, you stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "This too is from my Lord." That shift alone brings emotional relief and spiritual peace. Pain is an unavoidable part of the human experience. No matter how strong one's faith is, no matter how righteous or sincere a person tries to be, hardship will still touch their life in one form or another. Loss, disappointment, illness, betrayal, and unmet expectations are realities that every heart must face. Trusting Allah does not create a barrier that blocks pain from entering life. Instead, it transforms how pain is carried and what it produces within the soul. This is why it is said that trust in Allah does not remove pain, but it removes despair, which is far more destructive than pain itself. Pain affects the body and emotions, but despair attacks the soul. Pain can make a person cry, but despair makes a person give up. Pain can exhaust you, but despair convinces you that there is no point in continuing. When trust in Allah is weak, pain quickly turns into hopelessness. The mind begins to ask dangerous questions. Why is this happening to me? Will this ever end? What did I do to deserve this? These thoughts slowly drain the heart of light. But when trust in Allah is firm, pain is met with faith. The believer still feels hurt, but they do not feel abandoned. Trust gives pain meaning. Instead of seeing hardship as punishment or bad luck, the believer views it as a test, a lesson, or even a hidden mercy. This perspective does not minimize suffering, it dignifies it. The heart understands that Allah does not burden a soul pointlessly. Every trial has a reason, even if that reason is not immediately visible. This belief prevents pain from becoming poisonous. It keeps the soul from collapsing under the weight of uncertainty. One of the greatest sources of despair is fear that hardship is permanent. People often feel overwhelmed not just by pain itself, but by the thought that it may never end. Trust in Allah addresses this fear directly. The believer knows that Allah is capable of changing any situation in an instant. No difficulty is too big for Him, and no relief is too far away. Even if relief is delayed, it is never denied without wisdom. This knowledge allows the heart to endure pain without losing hope. Trust also reminds the believer that they are not alone in their suffering. When a person feels isolated in hardship, despair grows stronger. But trust reconnects the heart to Allah, who sees every tear, hears every silent prayer, and knows every unspoken fear. This awareness brings comfort even when circumstances remain unchanged. The believer may still struggle, but they struggle with a sense of divine companionship, and that makes all the difference. Another way trust removes despair is by shifting focus from immediate relief to ultimate purpose. Not every hardship is meant to be resolved quickly in this life. Some tests shape character, purify the heart, or elevate spiritual rank. Trust allows the believer to accept that some answers come later, even beyond this world. This long-term vision protects the heart from the suffocating pressure of needing everything to make sense right now. Trust in Allah also empowers resilience. When despair is absent, the believer continues to function, to pray, to hope, and to strive even while in pain. They do not shut down emotionally or spiritually. Instead, they lean more heavily on Allah. Pain then becomes a bridge rather than a barrier, a bridge toward deeper faith, humility, and dependence on the Creator. It is also important to understand that expressing pain does not contradict trust. Crying, feeling sad, or feeling weak does not mean faith is lacking. Trust means that despite these emotions, the heart does not accuse Allah of injustice or abandon hope in His mercy. The believer may say this hurts, but they do not say Allah has forsaken me. That distinction is what separates pain from despair. Over time, trust transforms the memory of pain as well. Hardships that once felt unbearable are later seen as turning points. Moments that strengthened faith, corrected direction, or brought the believer closer to Allah. Despair would have destroyed these lessons, but trust preserves them. The heart grows wiser, softer, and more grounded through trials, endured with faith. In the end, pain is a visitor that comes and goes, but despair is a prison that traps the soul. Trust in Allah keeps the prison door open. It allows the believer to suffer without losing themselves, to hurt without losing hope, and to endure without collapsing. This is the quiet power of trust. It does not promise a life without pain, but it guarantees a heart that never drowns in darkness. One of the hardest things for the human heart is letting go. Letting go of outcomes, people, and expectations. Yet letting go for the sake of Allah is one of the highest forms of faith. When you place your affairs in His hands, you free your heart from constant stress. You still work, you still strive, but you no longer burden your soul with fear. You do your part and leave the result to Allah, and that balance is where peace lives. Letting go is one of the most difficult challenges for the human heart. People become deeply attached to outcomes they desire, to relationships they invest in, and to expectations they carefully build over time. The mind begins to imagine how things should unfold, and the heart clings tightly to that picture. When reality does not match those expectations, stress, anger, and disappointment take over. Trust in Allah invites the believer to a different path, a path where letting go is not seen as loss, but as an act of faith and surrender to divine wisdom. Letting go does not mean giving up effort or becoming careless about life. Islam teaches responsibility, hard work, and intention, but it also teaches that the result of every effort belongs to Allah alone. The believer works sincerely, plans wisely, and then releases the outcome into Allah's hands. This release is where peace begins. When the heart stops obsessing over results, it is freed from constant pressure. Anxiety often comes from wanting certainty in a world that is by design uncertain. Letting go acknowledges that uncertainty and places trust in the one who controls it. Many people fear letting go because they believe it means losing something forever. In reality, letting go for the sake of Allah never results in loss. What is truly meant for you will reach you even if you loosen your grip, and what is not meant for you will never stay, no matter how tightly you hold on. Trusting Allah allows the heart to accept this truth without bitterness. Instead of exhausting the soul by forcing outcomes, the believer rests in the assurance that Allah's choices are always better, even when they are painful. Letting go is also closely tied to humility. When a person insists on controlling everything, it often stems from an inflated sense of self-importance, even if it appears as fear. Trust humbles the heart by reminding it that human knowledge is limited. Allah sees the beginning, the middle, and the end of every matter. When the believer accepts this, they stop arguing with destiny. They stop replaying what-if scenarios and blaming themselves or others for things that were never in their control to begin with. There is immense emotional relief in this surrender. A heart that refuses to let go carries a heavy burden. It constantly revisits the past, worries about the future, and struggles to stay present. Letting go releases this burden. It allows the believer to live in the moment with faith, knowing that Allah is already managing tomorrow. This does not remove responsibility. It removes unnecessary emotional suffering. The believer becomes lighter, calmer, and more focused. Letting go also strengthens trust in a practical way. Each time a believer releases an outcome to Allah and later witnesses His wisdom unfold, faith grows. Sometimes the result turns out better than expected. Other times it reveals protection from harm that was not visible before. Over time, these experiences build a deep internal confidence that Allah never fails His servants. This confidence makes future acts of surrender easier and more natural. Another important aspect of letting go is emotional attachment to people. Human relationships are fragile, and placing ultimate dependence on people often leads to heartbreak. Trusting Allah teaches the believer to love people without making them the source of peace. When someone leaves, disappoints, or changes, the believer grieves, but they do not collapse. They understand that hearts are in Allah's control, and whatever leaves their life does so with divine permission. This understanding preserves dignity and inner stability. Letting go also protects the believer from resentment. When expectations are rigid, disappointment easily turns into anger toward Allah or toward others. Trust dissolves this anger by replacing it with acceptance. The believer may still feel pain, but they do not poison their heart with blame. They choose faith over frustration, patience over protest. This choice is not easy, but it is deeply rewarding. Ultimately, letting go is an act of worship. It is a silent declaration that Allah is sufficient, that His plan is wiser, and that His mercy is greater than our fears. When a believer truly lets go for the sake of Allah, they are not left empty-handed. They are filled with peace, clarity, and strength. The heart learns that it was never meant to carry everything alone, and in releasing control, it finally finds the freedom it has been seeking all along. Trust in Allah is not built overnight. It grows through constant remembrance, sincere dua, and patience during trials. Every time you choose patience over panic, your trust deepens. Every time you remember Allah instead of overthinking, your heart strengthens. Over time, the believer begins to feel secure. Not because life is easy, but because Allah is near. Our trust in Allah is not something that suddenly appears in the heart fully formed. It is built slowly, strengthened through experience, and deepened by consistent connection with Allah. Just like physical strength grows through repeated effort, spiritual trust grows through remembrance and patience. Without these two foundations, trust remains fragile, easily shaken by difficulty or delay. With them, it becomes firm, steady, and deeply rooted in the heart. Remembrance of Allah keeps the heart alive and aware. When a person remembers Allah frequently, through prayer, dua, reflection, and conscious awareness, the heart remains connected to its source of peace. Forgetfulness, on the other hand, allows fear and anxiety to take over. When Allah is absent from the mind, worries multiply. Remembrance brings perspective. It reminds the believer who is in control, who provides, who protects, and who never abandons His servants. This constant awareness naturally strengthens trust because the heart feels less alone in its struggles. Remembrance also reshapes inner dialogue. Instead of the mind endlessly replaying negative thoughts, remembrance redirects attention toward hope and reliance. Simple phrases spoken with sincerity can calm a racing heart and ground a troubled soul. Over time, this practice trains the heart to turn toward Allah automatically during moments of stress. This habit becomes a spiritual reflex, replacing panic with prayer and fear with faith. Patience, on the other hand, is the soil in which trust grows. Without patience, trust cannot survive difficulty. Many people trust Allah only when results are immediate. When relief is delayed, frustration creeps in, and faith begins to weaken. True patience is not passive waiting, it is active endurance. It is choosing to remain obedient, hopeful, and respectful in attitude, even when circumstances are painful. This kind of patience protects trust from being eroded by disappointment. Patience teaches the believer to accept timing. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning that Allah's timing rarely matches human urgency. We want answers now, relief now, clarity now. Patience reminds the heart that delay does not mean rejection. Often, it means preparation, protection, or growth. Trust grows when the believer repeatedly witnesses how delayed outcomes eventually reveal wisdom that could not have been understood earlier. Remembrance and patience work together to stabilize the heart. Remembrance strengthens faith in the present moment, while patience sustains it over time. When both are practiced consistently, the believer develops emotional resilience. Life's challenges no longer feel like threats to faith, they become opportunities to rely more deeply on Allah. Each test endured with patience becomes proof that trust was justified. Another important effect of remembrance and patience is the purification of intention. When trust grows, the believer begins to seek Allah's pleasure rather than immediate comfort. This shift changes how hardship is perceived. Instead of asking only for ease, the believer asks for strength, guidance, and acceptance. This mindset brings peace even before circumstances improve, because the heart is aligned with a higher purpose. Over time, trust shaped by remembrance and patience becomes steady rather than emotional. It is no longer dependent on feelings or moods. Even on difficult days, when motivation feels low and questions arise, the heart remains anchored. This stability is one of the greatest blessings of consistent remembrance and patient endurance. It prevents faith from fluctuating wildly with every life event. Trust that grows this way also transforms how the believer views themselves. They become less harsh in self-judgment and more compassionate toward their own struggles. They understand that growth takes time, that mistakes are part of the journey, and that Allah's mercy is greater than their shortcomings. This self-awareness strengthens trust because the believer no longer feels unworthy of Allah's care. In the end, trust built through remembrance and patience becomes a quiet strength that carries the believer through all seasons of life. It does not eliminate hardship, but it makes hardship manageable. It does not guarantee immediate relief, but it ensures inner stability. With every moment of remembrance and every act of patience, trust grows deeper and the heart moves closer to the peace that only Allah can give. Peace is fragile, it disappears when circumstances change, but the peace that comes from trusting Allah remains even in hardship. It anchors the heart during storms and keeps the soul steady during uncertainty. This peace does not shout, it quietly settles within you, reminding you that you are never alone, never forgotten, and never without divine care. The peace that comes from trusting Allah is unlike any peace the world can offer. Worldly peace is fragile and temporary, tied closely to circumstances, comfort, and control. It exists only as long as things go according to plan. The moment life shifts, as it always does, that kind of peace disappears, leaving the heart anxious and unsettled. But the peace that comes from trust in Allah is unbreakable, because it is rooted something constant, something beyond change. It is anchored in faith in the one who never changes, never fails, and never abandons his servants. This peace remains even when problems do not disappear. A believer may still face uncertainty, pressure, and loss, yet their heart is not overwhelmed. This is because their peace is not dependent on the situation improving. It is dependent on their relationship with Allah. When the heart knows that Allah is in control, it no longer feels threatened by chaos. Instead of asking, how will I survive this? The believer finds themselves thinking, Allah will carry me through this. That certainty creates inner stability that no external storm can destroy. Of the most powerful qualities of this peace is that it protects the believer from fear of the unknown. The future is one of the greatest sources of anxiety for human beings. People fear what they cannot predict or control. Trust in Allah removes this fear by shifting focus away from unknown outcomes and toward known attributes of Allah, His mercy, wisdom, and power. The believer may not know what tomorrow holds, but they know who holds tomorrow. This knowledge is enough to calm the heart, even when the path ahead is unclear. This peace also strengthens the believer during moments of loss. Loss often shakes people because it creates a sense of emptiness and instability. But when trust in Allah is strong, loss does not feel like abandonment. The believer understands that Allah gives and takes with wisdom and compassion. While grief is natural and sadness is real, the heart remains connected to hope. This connection prevents the believer from breaking under the weight of sorrow. Instead, grief becomes a process of healing supported by faith. Another remarkable aspect of this peace is that it remains private and internal. It does not require constant reassurance from others. It does not need approval, validation, or explanations. It exists quietly within the heart, even when outward circumstances are difficult. A believer may appear calm in situations that would overwhelm others, not because they are unaffected, but because their heart is settled by trust. This inner calm is not arrogance or emotional numbness, it is spiritual confidence. The peace born from trust also shapes behavior. A person who is at peace does not react impulsively or destructively under pressure. They respond with patience, wisdom, and restraint. This peace softens anger, reduces panic, and encourages thoughtful action. When the heart is calm, the mind becomes clearer, and decisions are made with greater balance. In this way, peace is not just a feeling, it becomes a guiding force in daily life. This peace is unbreakable because it grows stronger through hardship rather than weaker. Every trial endured with trust reinforces the believer's certainty that Allah is sufficient. Over time, the heart accumulates memories of divine help, moments when relief came unexpectedly or strength appeared when it seemed impossible. These experiences form a foundation that future challenges cannot easily shake. The believer remembers that Allah has always been there before, and that memory itself brings calm. Perhaps the most beautiful quality of this peace is that it draws the believer closer to Allah. Instead of pushing the heart away through frustration or doubt, hardship becomes a means of deeper connection. The believer turns to Allah not only in desperation, but in reliance and love. This closeness is a source of comfort that remains even if circumstances never change. It is a peace that exists because Allah is near, not because life is easy. In the end, the peace that comes from trusting Allah does not promise a trouble-free life. It promises something far greater, a heart that remains steady no matter what life brings. It is a peace that cannot be taken away by loss, fear, or uncertainty. It stays with the believer in darkness and in light, in ease and in hardship. This is why it is unbreakable, because it is not built on the world but on faith in Allah alone. When you truly trust Allah, you stop carrying burdens that were never meant for you. Your heart rests, your faith strengthens, and your soul finds peace. This is not just a concept, it is a promise. And once you experience this peace, you will never want to live without it again.